Broadcasting from Tokyo, Japan, a slow media project. Bold, reality grounded, unexpected perspectives, global affairs with context, culture with bite. No clickbait.
It's a dinner party.
For your brain, the Fushigi Times Podcast with Angelino Schintu.
Hello, welcome. It's the Fushigi Times Podcast, the audio edition of my long-form journalism at fushigitimes.com. In this episode,
Israeli officials claim the operation set Iran's nuclear ambitions back by years.
Iran's most formidable proxy, Hezbollah, was battered by Israel's sustained...
Iran's freedom clock stopped in 1979, but history reminds us that missed futures don't have to disappear. From nukes reduced to rubble to proxies in retreat, a regime built on defiance now faces the slow truth of its own undoing. In these Fushigi times, Iran's DeLorean moment flickers, a chance to trade dogma for dignity, exile for ingenuity, and detour for destiny. This episode of the Fushigi Times podcast is brought to you by, and I could be mentioning your organization's name here. Keep listening to find out how our promotional partnership packages work. Iran's alternate 1985, the future that should have been and could still be. The clock tower strikes again. If Marty McFly had parked his DeLorean in Tehran in mid-June 2025, he'd swear Doc Brown had punched in the wrong timeline coordinates. 88 miles per hour into the alternate Iran. Mid-2025 marked a dramatic escalation of regional tensions as Israeli fighter jets launched a precision strike deep inside Iran, knocking out nuclear enrichment facilities. The raid shattered Iran's air defense shield and sent shockwaves across the Middle East. While Iranian state media downplayed the damage, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed significant disruption.
Israeli officials claim the operation set Iran's nuclear ambitions back by years and has killed senior Quds force commanders. Tehran denies the deaths, but international media is reporting the Israeli claims widely. The attack was part of a longer arc that began with Hamas's cross-border assault on Israel in October 2023. Intelligence leaks later confirmed Iran's involvement through its covert Palestinian core, turning whispers of support into hard evidence. This time, Israel didn't wait for consensus. U.S. President Donald Trump has joined the fray, ordering direct U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. For Washington, the era of strategic ambiguity is over. Israel now leads the charge, and Tehran faces a new reality.
A geopolitical reset is underway. Iran must decide, evolve or be left behind. Proxy empire in liquidation. Iran's web of proxies, once the envy and terror of Middle Eastern geopolitics, unraveled faster than most analysts expected.
Once Iran's most formidable proxy, Hezbollah, was battered by Israel's sustained northern campaign. Its leadership went into hiding, its strongholds reduced to rubble, and its rocket fire scattered and desperate. Once a quasi-state actor, it is increasingly a guerrilla force, its regional stature fading. And Syria has also slipped from Tehran's grasp, Assad's regime collapsing in late 2024 under pressure from opposition groups backed by shifting coalitions. Iranian military sites were destroyed or seized, and Russia, distracted by Ukraine and unrest at home, offered no rescue. The Damascus-Tehran-Moscow triangle is broken. And in the south, Yemen's Houthis have been hit hard by Israeli and US strikes. Once a threat to Red Sea shipping, they now resemble a fractured insurgency, isolated, depleted, and increasingly irrelevant.
A Gulf diplomat on the sidelines of a recent international summit quipped, "They exported revolution like it was oil. Now the market's collapsed." The once visible Quds force is in disarray. Tehran's proxy web from Baghdad to Beirut is rapidly unraveling. What remains is a diminished Iran, hemmed in by sanctions, battlefield losses, and eroding regional trust. The era of Iran as a formidable regional power broker is collapsing in the vacuum left by its 88-mile-per-hour retreat. The alternate 1985, Persian edition. History is shaped as much by the paths not taken as by those chosen. In 1979, Iran stood at a crossroads. The Shah, though an autocrat wielding the repressive Savak secret police, presided over a state heavily investing in education, science, women's rights, and infrastructure. Cities like Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz were vibrant, cosmopolitan hubs pulsating with art, culture, and intellectual discourse. Miniskirts were a common sight. Women held positions in government cabinets, drove cars freely, and attended universities in large numbers. By the mid-1970s, Iran boasted one of the highest female literacy rates in the Middle East. Women accounted for over 40% of university enrollments. Family law reforms gave women legal avenues in marriage and divorce. Farroukhroo Parsa broke barriers as the first female cabinet minister, serving as Minister of Education. Shirin Ebadi, who would later win a Nobel Peace Prize, was a respected judge. Former Tehran MP Merangiz Kar said, "Women were visible everywhere, in universities, on television, in parliament. It was not a perfect system, but it was changing fast." Many believed Iran might have followed the path of South Korea, harnessing oil wealth to build a modern outward-facing economy aligned strategically with the West. Iranian universities gained global recognition, and an emerging middle class swelled with technocrats, entrepreneurs, and artists. In this alternate reality, Iran would have become a key regional hub for innovation and cultural exchange, a Muslim-majority country blending tradition and modernity, thriving economically without succumbing to either Soviet-style communism or brutal Islamic theocracy. Iranian cinema, literature, and music would have flourished on the global stage, from Cannes to Hollywood, while Tehran's tech sector rose as the region's Silicon Valley. But then came the Ayatollah Khomeini. The Islamic Revolution overthrew not only the Shah, but Iran's entire developmental trajectory. The clerics established the Velayat-e-Faqih, a system of absolute theocratic rule masquerading as republicanism. Oil revenues were redirected to regional proxy wars rather than domestic development. Women were forced into veils and segregated spaces. Music, once a cherished art form, was suppressed. Dissent was crushed under heavy-handed security apparatuses. The dream of joining the First World was abandoned in favor of a revolutionary bunker mentality.
Hi, we hope you're enjoying the podcast. If your organisation shares our values, slow media, long-form journalism, global context, we'd love to work with you. This is where your branding could be, right here in the middle of the Fushigi Times podcast, just like in the written edition, heard and seen by a global audience that values independent thinking and cultural depth. Be part of the Fushigi. Email editor@fushigitimes.com and let's start a conversation.
No clickbait. Culture with bite. The Fushigi Times Podcast.
Of a revolutionary bunker mentality. The consequences have become severe. A massive brain drain, economic stagnation, worsened by sanctions and corruption, and a profound alienation among Iran's youth. The women, life, freedom protests of 2022 and 2023, sparked by the tragic killing of Mahsa Amini in custody, were not spontaneous riots, but a profound cry for dignity and human rights. Had Iran taken the South Korean path, it would today boast a GDP multiple times its current size, diversified industries, a flourishing arts scene, and far less reliance on geopolitical brinkmanship. Instead, Iran is trapped in a self-imposed isolation, holding on to a myth of resistance while its youth dream of escape. Some analysts believe the revolution erased more than reform. It erased a potential future timeline for entire generations. Other nations in the region, far less developed than Iran in the mid-1970s, have instead filled the void it left behind. The United Arab Emirates, for instance, has transformed from dusty Gulf outposts into high-tech cities of glass and ambition. Dubai and Abu Dhabi boast world-class infrastructure, thriving financial sectors, and a brand of state-directed capitalism that markets itself with cosmopolitan flair. Qatar has parlayed its gas wealth into global media influence via Al Jazeera and soft power diplomacy through sports and culture, despite what some of us journalists see as a far too pro-Islamic reporting stance. Even Saudi Arabia, long the poster child for religious conservatism, is now attempting a radical modernization under Vision 2030, legalizing music festivals, empowering women, and courting foreign investment. None of these states are democratic, but they have grasped a simple truth. Legitimacy in the 21st century is earned, not through ideological purity or military adventurism, but through prosperity, stability, and international integration. Iran, once the region's intellectual and cultural lodestar, has found itself outpaced by its neighbors, not because it lacked potential, but because the Islamic zealots chose revolution over reform, dogma over development. Tehran's June 2025, daylight after shockwaves. With bombs falling even closer, Iran has faced a reckoning. The June 2025 Israeli strikes were both precise and symbolic. Iran's nuclear program, long a national obsession and technological stand-in for sovereignty and deterrence, was exposed as vulnerable. The destruction inflicted with minimal resistance was not only a military humiliation, but also a profound psychological blow. Regional powers watched cautiously. Gulf monarchies, particularly the UAE and Saudi Arabia, publicly condemned escalation but privately welcomed the weakening of their main rival. Russia, preoccupied with Ukraine and internal challenges, has failed to either assist Syria or Tehran, and China hedges its bets, balancing strategic interests against regional instability while eyeing infrastructure investments opportunistically. Inside Iran, the economy outlook is bleak. Inflation is hovering around 35 to 40%. Youth unemployment stands at approximately 22%, and corruption remains endemic throughout government. The Associated Press and Reuters have reported the rial's plunged to record lows in unofficial markets, while a recent Financial Times analysis noted long-standing weakness amid sanctions and parallel market clampdowns. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has entrenched itself across critical sectors of the economy, including telecommunications, petrochemicals, construction, and illicit oil exports. Reuters reporting confirms that the Guards now control large portions of Iran's export economy, bypassing official state structures and redirecting revenue into a shadow economy. This enrichment is not just about profit, it's about regime preservation. The Islamic Republic remains a state at war with its own citizenry. An underground Persian poll leaked in mid-2024 showed over 75% of respondents favoring a major constitutional change. The regime responded with swift arrests of poll organizers. The Islamic Republic's legitimacy is rapidly eroding. Iran's domestic turmoil compounds its geopolitical setbacks. Faced with rising street protests, economic implosion, and now external military pressure, the regime's survival instincts become increasingly erratic. Crackdowns intensify, but the more repression mounts, the louder the calls for reform grow. This is not simply a regime versus people conflict, it's a civilizational clash between a generation shackled by clerical decrees and a youth yearning for a digital future. The DeLorean moment. Still possible? Despite its troubles, Iran's future is not written in stone. Nearby examples offer hope. The UAE, once a desert backwater, evolved into a global commercial and tourism hub by blending economic liberalism with political control. Iran, endowed with a rich culture, youthful population, and strategic geography, could surpass that trajectory. Its diaspora boasts Silicon Valley-level capital and influence. Iranian youth are highly educated and tech-savvy, plugged into global networks and ideas. Its intellectual traditions, from Persian poetry to philosophy, remain profound and enduring. All that is lacking is leadership, with the courage to trade ideological rigidity for pragmatic ambition, and to see the past 4 decades not as sacred, but as a costly detour into an alternate reality that should never have been. Nuclear weapons will not secure Iran's future, nor will endless proxy wars. The country needs economic stability, political legitimacy, and reintegration into the international community. That change may arise from grassroots movements, or a regime willing to reform before collapse becomes inevitable. The Islamic Republic isn't immortal, it's just heavily armed and out of ideas, said a Tehran-based academic speaking on condition of anonymity. Even some establishment figures quietly speculate about constitutional reform. As young Iranians learn more about the country's pre-1979 history, not the Shah's propaganda, but a flawed yet modernizing society, they increasingly see the current regime as a detour rather than a destiny. In private conversations with reformist figures, one cleric urged Iranians to consider Indonesia, often cited for its Islam Nusantara tradition balancing piety, pluralism, and democracy as an aspiring model. Enter Reza Pahlavi, the eldest son of the last Shah, now based in the United States, who has positioned himself as a leadership alternative. In late June, during an extended media push that included remarks to Western journalists in Washington and Paris, Pahlavi declared the Islamic Republic's end near, calling this a potential Berlin Wall moment.
Hi, we hope you're enjoying the podcast. If your organization shares our values, slow media, long-form journalism, global context, we'd love to work with you. This is where your branding could be, right here in the middle of the Fushigi Times podcast, just like in the written edition, heard and seen by a global audience that values independent thinking and cultural depth. Be part of the Fushigi. Email editor@fushigitimes.com and let's start a conversation.
Unexpected Perspectives, a slow media project. The Fushigi Times Podcast.
Potential Berlin Wall moment. At a press conference in Paris on the 23rd of June, he urged a democratic transition and argued that dismantling Iran's nuclear infrastructure was insufficient. He said only a democratic transition in Iran can ensure lasting peace. A coalition presented at the Munich Convergence Summit in February 2025 has endorsed him as leader of a proposed transitional government to take shape should the regime fall. Since the June airstrikes between Israel and Iran, Pahlavi has intensified his message, encouraging domestic uprisings, claiming Iran's supreme leader is in hiding, and stating that a 100-day roadmap is in place and ready for implementation. His supporters point to his organizational readiness and increasingly public role in international diplomacy. Meanwhile, skeptics question his legitimacy within Iran itself, noting that decades of exile have left him disconnected from the realities on the ground. Still, Pahlavi's growing prominence signals something deeper, a readiness among segments of the diaspora and even some internal reformists to revisit the notion of monarchy, or at least a transitional stewardship, not as nostalgia, but as a mechanism for national repair. Whether that route will be taken remains uncertain, but the shift in narrative itself, a form of DeLorean-style time travel, a rewriting of what the future might plausibly contain. Iran's vast underground economy, creative entrepreneurial spirit, and burgeoning tech hubs hint at an alternative reality just beneath the surface. In that sense, the DeLorean moment, a leap back to reclaim a lost trajectory, is both a metaphor and a possibility. It requires re-engaging with a modernity that embraces pluralism and openness rather than exile and dogma. Flux capacitor energized, Persia's DeLorean awaits. Back to the Future ends with a jolt and a choice. Marty McFly sets the time circuits to the 21st of October 2015, a date that became pop culture shorthand for imagined futures, hoverboards, and the tantalizing idea that timelines can be rewritten. The Hill Valley Clock Tower was struck by lightning on the 11th of November 1955, while Iran's own clock stopped on the 11th of February 1979, when the Islamic Revolution seized control and rerouted the nation's trajectory. That was when the time circuits jammed, futures erased, and a generation's dreams consigned to black and white television, war, and theocratic rule. In an alternative 1985 Persian edition, the DeLorean never came. But now, in the wake of the June 2025 airstrikes and decades of squandered potential, a different kind of time machine hums beneath the surface. Iran's youth, educated, connected, and disillusioned, aren't waiting for Doc Brown. They're rewriting the future themselves. Not with plutonium and flux capacitors, but with defiance, bootleg cinema, VPNs, and a quiet conviction that change, however fragile, is inevitable. Tehran's rulers may double down on repression, but the people watch and whisper. Because a generation raised on Instagram yearns not for martyrdom, but for Wi-Fi, dignity, and opportunity. Iran squandered one future in 1979. A second chance now flickers amid the rubble. A shot at a future that trades ideology for ingenuity, fatwas for fiber optics, martyrdom for meritocracy. Now, more than ever, Iran needs its own Marty McFly, a courageous figure willing to slide across the hood into the driver's seat, engage the time circuits for a leap beyond dogma, and pilot the nation towards a modern, inclusive destiny. Time circuits ready. Destination 21st of October. Year? Well, to be announced, maybe. But this time, forward. This original content is part of our slow media canon, carefully crafted, independently produced, and free forever. But slow media needs slow money. If this content resonated, support the Fushigi Times by subscribing, free or paid, but paid helps produce more of this essential journalism. And every bit helps keep the editor, that's me, properly caffeinated and busy crafting more Fushigi.
The Fushigi Times Podcast, an original slow media production. From the studios of Fushigi Labs, Tokyo.
Created by Angelino Schintu.
Want to rebroadcast this content? Broadcast. Or talk collaboration? Email editor@fushigitimes.com.